Okay, we are live.
Welcome, everybody. This will be my last session before the summer. I have my summer program starting on Monday, so this will be it. And we'll be talking about what's going to be going on during the summer a little bit later. But Evolve will be producing some live streams over the summer, and we'll talk about that, like I said, a little bit later. So today what I'm going to do is I'm going to show how the simplest format, what we're doing in Block 1 in Evolve, how a simple layout of grayscale can work equally for a ball, which one could argue is a remedial subject, like this, as well as for a complex portrait. And so I'm actually going to paint them side by side, one step at a time. I'll do the ball, and then I'll do the portrait, and I'm going to move back and forth so you can see how each step that goes into this very simple ball equates to the figure. And so again, the figure is not going to be a highly refined finished portrait, but in the amount of time that I'm going to take to work on it, you'll see that the same pieces go into it. It breaks down the same way. All that would be required to finish the portrait is a little bit of refinement, a little bit of kind of rolling up the sleeves and getting in and just being a little bit more particular. But overall, being able to connect a very simple subject with a very complex subject and show you how the approach applies equally to both, I think is a valuable exercise. And it's nice to be able to do just a one-day sitting, get the thing done instead of sprawling out over 10 or 12 weeks, as we've been doing recently. So first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to break down, for those of you who are not in Evolve and haven't seen the videos where we kind of describe this, I'm going to explain to you how I'm going to break this down, and then I'll do it on the portrait as well. I actually, I just ran this paint. I found this portrait like an hour and a half ago, and so I haven't even really looked at it. I don't know what I'm going to do with it, so I'm going to be breaking it down in real time for you. There'll be a little bit of bouncing around in there. As I do that, you'll see my thinking. So the way that we generally start when we do it in Evolve is we would take a subject like this. We have our transfer image. And this would either be done from direct observation, my sketch, or from a transfer. These are both transferred. So I'm going to look at the ball, and the first thing I want to do is locate the shadows. So in this image, I have three shadows. I have one on the ball, one cast on the table, and one on the front of the table. So this, and this. I'll move this over. Just make sure I got it. So I've basically got three shadows: the front of the table, the cast shadow on the table, and the shadow on the ball. Once I've located my shadows, what I want to do is find the one that's darkest. So of the three, the shadow cast on the table is darkest. That's going to be my extreme shadow. Of the remaining two shadows, I would say the one on the front of the table is the darker. The one on the ball is the lighter, which would be my moderate shadow. And then the one on the front of the table, though darker than this, it is still much closer in value to the moderate shadow than it is to the extreme. So it'll be painted with this shade as well. So again, simplification. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by just painting my extreme shadow. I just have one. And then I'm going to go over to the portrait. I'm going to break it down the same way, make sense of it, and then I'll paint the extreme shadows there. So again, just one shade here. These two shades are going to function as shadows. These two will function as light. So anything in the painting that is a shadow will be addressed with one of these, and anything that's in the light will be addressed with one of these. So. And again, on these smaller pieces, normally I'd be rotating it to get a better angle so that my edges are sharp. Like these bottom edges are not going to be sharp because the brush is clumsy in that direction. It's easier on a small piece where the edges need to be a bit more refined just to rotate it. On bigger paintings, it's not important because you have a lot more room. The edges don't have to be very sharp. They can kind of sprawl a little bit and have kind of tattered edges. And at that scale, it doesn't make a difference. So again, I said there were three shadows. This one's my extreme, and the other two are moderates. So the first step is always the same. I figure out what's a shadow, and then I find the one that's darkest, the one that's lightest, and break down the others based on which the one they're closer to. And then I only paint my extreme shadow. Now that I've done that, I'm going to move over to the portrait. And I'm going to do exactly the same thing. So in the portrait, I'm going to break down a little, there's a little bit more going on, obviously. So I would say we have a shadow here. We have a shadow in the skin, shadow in the hair. This shadow's kind of running through here. And I mean, I've got basically 1, 2, 3. I would say all of the shadow that's connected is 1. Shadows in the eyes. So like maybe 4 or 5 shadows. Of all the shadows that are here, the one on the shirt is the darkest. It's my extreme shadow. Of all the remaining shadows, I would say the one on the side of the face is the lightest. It would be my moderate shadow. Now, the shadow in the hair, when I compare it to the shadow on the face and the shadow here, I would say it's probably closer in shade to the shadow on the face. It's kind of in the middle. It could probably fall in either direction. But I think that if I grab this, if I had it in Photoshop and I had this shade, and I grab this one, it would be closer on the scale to the one on the face. So I'm going to label this one as a moderate shadow as well. I would say inside of the eyes, we're talking about an extreme shadow. And the eyes, the corneas are inside of the shadows. They're not facing the light. And I can see that they're just where the light is hitting the eye. Like I can see the light out here. It's not in here. The eyes are both turned this way towards the shadows. So they're all going to fall in. And I would say even the mouth, I would go with, it's closer to the moderate shadow than the extreme. So for the most part, I've got the shirt and the eyes that are going to be extreme shadows, and then the hair and pretty much everything else will be a moderate shadow. And that's going to simplify. This is going to look very, it's going to be very basic when I first paint it, but I will flesh it out as time goes by. So I'm just going to move this over. And again, once I know where everything, what shades are going to go where, it does make it a little bit easier. I don't actually need the photograph at this point. I could just kind of fill. I'm going to be thinning down the paint a little bit more for this. Just there's more ground to cover, and again, you know, I'm well versed with the material. Making it thinner doesn't mean it's going to be see-through unless I want it to be. But it's going to allow me to move the paint around faster and get through this a little bit quicker. Today, I got oil on my hands. And again, I'm going to keep this very simple. There's not a lot going on. I mean, at this point, it's so simple, I don't even need glasses. I can just paint. It's all big shapes. Eventually, I'll have to get my glasses on, but not right now. Here, I'm just looking at the stuff that is dark and what's light. And again, it's not so much dark and light. It's what is a shadow and what is not. So I can see these little folds in here. All the shadows on the shirt are extreme, so I'm addressing them as such. And I'm having to look to see where the shadow ends. The shadow doesn't just follow the stitching on the shirt. Kind of like this. Right? And always, like when you're putting your shadows down, there's always going to be some calculation. You've got to make sense of what your transfer is trying to tell you. It's so easy when you do the transfer. You can put these lines in, and they make sense because they're sitting on top of a photograph. So you know exactly what they mean. And when the photograph is taken away and all you have is your lines, then you've got to actually remember what your intent was when you were making those marks. Again, as we're going, if anybody has any questions, feel free to jump in and ask. Now, I'm working on a board here, which makes filling a little bit easier. Gradients are a little bit more work, or they can be, because the board is smooth. Really, all of the work that goes into the gradients has to be done by your brush. The texture of the canvas isn't going to beat the paint up for you and dissolve the edges. Also, the board tends to absorb the paint very quickly. It just drinks it in. It's interesting, you'll see like by the time the shadows are all laid in, the painting will already be looking pretty solid. The light, we always do shadows first. There are many reasons for it, but just as a baseline, if you think that the canvas or the panel is going to be lighter than the shadows when you put them down, so that means that when you fill the shadows, everything that's left is lighter. It looks like light relative to the shadows. Where if you put the shadows down, if you put the lights down first, everything in the panel is going to be lighter. And so you're going to wind up with an image that looks kind of like a negative. Okay? So I'm going to go down to a smaller brush and I'm going to put in the darks of the eyes. Time for glasses. And again, I'm not making details. Just very basic shapes. I'm not worried about anything but the most basic shape here. The other stuff will get addressed later on in subsequent stages. Right, there's a lot more going on in the eyes than just a very dark circle. Right. And I'm looking at the eyelashes. As I'm looking at it, I'm comparing them to this shadow and this, like all of this in here, the fold in the eye. And I'm actually going to go and I'm going to treat all of that as an extreme shadow. As I'm looking at it, I'm making that call. I'm going to treat it all as an extreme shadow. It's not this dark, and it'll get opened up later on. Again, and we will get around to that tonight. You'll be able to see it, and we'll be able to make some sense of it for you. Now, I'm not going to do it on this side. For me, the eyelashes they're dark up here, but then they lighten up. So I'm not going to do it on that side. And even like the eyebrow is closer to this than it is to this. I'm just going to let it be. And I've got, again, I don't want to get into like the dark in the nostrils and the dark in the mouth. I've got to make a decision as to overall which shade are we dealing with. Like the idea is to stay out of the nuance, right? I'm not getting into little marks. There's a couple of marks in the nose, like the nostrils and in the mouth between the lips. They could easily be painted in as extreme shadows, but the moment you start doing that, you get into a very complex painting very quickly. And I want to stay away from that. I want to keep this very basic for as long as I can. So I've got my extreme shadows in, and now I'm going to move back to the sphere, and I'm going to put in my moderate shadows. It's over here, actually.
Hey Kevin,
Yeah.
what medium are you using right now?
I am using a mixture of linseed oil and alkyd.
Awesome, thanks.
Yeah, so it's one, one unit of alkyd and 5 units of linseed oil. And so now I've got two moderate shadows. Just going to put them in.
Here's a question for you, Kevin.
Yes.
What made you do portraits?
Um, you know what? When I was doing illustration work, I was painting figures all the time, and they're challenging. They're fun. They're challenging. I mean, I think nothing worse than being bored at work, right? The time just drags. And portraits were a natural move from doing book cover illustration. They were a natural step for me. Made a lot of sense, and I didn't have to get too far out of my comfort zone. The scale was different. Like working a lot larger, that was different, and that took some getting used to. But no, it was a very small step, and so exactly the same skill set was employed. I didn't have to learn. Well, let me not say it that way. I didn't have a lot that I had to learn to get started. Doing portraits over the years, I realized there was a lot more to it than what I thought when I first started. Right? So, and I enjoy them. Like I didn't get into them thinking, hey, I'm gonna love doing portraits. I actually, I didn't think that I would enjoy them, but I was commissioned to do work, and so I did it, and commissions just kept coming in. And I would tell people for the longest time, like people would ask about having a portrait done, and I would tell them, I would say, I'm not a portrait painter, but I'll take this portrait, I'll put it in queue, and when I get to it, if I'm still interested in doing portraits, I'll give you a call. And at one point, I realized like I had been doing portraits for like 5 years. I was booked like 18 months in advance, and I was like, I realized I was a portrait painter. Like I'd been doing it forever, and I didn't see any reason to stop. I was enjoying it, meeting interesting people, and everything about it was fun. And so, and I've been doing it ever since. I don't do it as much as I used to. I'm busy with teaching, but I do still take commissions, a little here and there. So now moving on to my moderate shadows, which is basically every shadow that's left is now going to be this shade. And again, I'm going to thin this down a bit. And again, it makes it more fluid. It makes it a little bit more see-through. Just make it a little bit more pliable. Different brush to get this down. A little bit thinner. Again, I'm at this point for what I'm doing here, I want to get it a little bit thinner. I want to be able to see through it just a tiny little bit. It'll make it easier for me, for the sake of what we're doing here, to be able to render into it later on. You know what? It's not going to play nice. I'm not going to worry about it.
Question for you, Kevin.
Yes.
Have you ever used alkyd paints like Winsor and Newton's Griffin line?
No. Actually, yes, I have. I have. And they're okay. Again, I'm partial to oil. I'm partial to oil. It's what I came up on as an illustrator. And, again, like oil paint, if you needed to dry faster, the alkyd, you can just add alkyd. Where if you're working with alkyd paint, you get what you get, right? It dries the way it dries, and right. So personally, I prefer oil paint. I've even tried like water soluble oils, and I always come back to the same thing, and it's like, hey, I like the way oil plays.
And another question,
Yes.
what made you decide to teach after such a long career?
You know what's funny? I've always wanted to teach. When I was young and I was looking to get into this, there were no resources. There was no place to go and really learn. And to be honest, like you could say like, going to a university, going to a college, but most of the colleges had very little to offer. Just a handful of teachers who actually had any idea what they were doing. And of those people, how many of them could teach it so that the students in the room understood it? It's like, it's one thing you could be a world-renowned painter, but that doesn't mean you can teach it. And I've sat in on classes with people who are incredible artists, and I marvel at the inability to explain what it is that they do, because they understand what they're doing. They're not at a loss for an understanding, but describing it to somebody who doesn't understand it, it's hard. It's hard, the longer you do this stuff, the more you take for granted. Like you don't even realize how much stuff you understand, how much you do without even thinking, that it's all on autopilot. And then when you talk to somebody who's trying to learn, and it's like, well, can't you see that? Can't you see that thing? It's so simple. It's like obvious and it's right there. And the student can't see it because they're not trained yet. And it takes years to develop this. Decades to develop it to the level of the people that you like, these, world-renowned professionals. And like I said, I think like for most of them, they've forgotten what it is to be blind. And so it's hard to get an education. And so for me, sharing what I've learned has been very important. It's been very important. And I've said this before, like, I'm lucky that I found art. It changed my life. It gave me the life that I have, and I've got a pretty good life. I have nothing to complain about with the life that I have. It's pretty good. And I would have been a construction worker otherwise. And there's nothing wrong with construction. I did it, I enjoyed the work, but it's a hard work. It's a hard job, and it beats up your body, and it ages you prematurely, and for me, like I said, I've had a really great life because of art, what it's allowed me to do, the people that I've met because of it, and fellow artists. When I was an illustrator, my peers, they were all such great people. All the illustrators that I knew, just everybody was so great. And so many gifted artists, hardworking and creative, and so like that was opened up to me because of art. And then later on, my portrait clients, which just, I've been very lucky. With all of this stuff, meeting just incredible people. And now, like even with Evolve, like and teaching here at the school, I just think it's the coolest thing, the people that I get to spend time with. And so, all of that comes to me through art. And so what I'm doing here is I'm sharing it. Maybe opening up that door for somebody else who, if not for what we do, might not have any access to this. And I think that matters to me. It's important. But that's actually why I got into making art, teaching art, because I want to be able to share what's been so pivotal in the life, in creating the life that I have for myself, with other people who might not have otherwise had access. And again, I was going to be doing a lot more. I had some ideas about what I was going to do here. And again, very important lesson. I mean, we do this pretty much every painting, where it's like, oh, I'm going to do this stuff, and then it doesn't go the way I intend. And then it's like, okay, we'll shift gears. And I don't mind saying, like, I've seen people do demos, and like you can see they get off track. You know, as a pro, I can see they get off track, and they keep it to themselves. They recover they recover quietly and then go back about their business. And the amateurs in the room don't know that they tripped up, right? And I understand they want people to think that what they do is magic. But like for me, I like the idea of people seeing when I make a mistake, or when I make a plan and it doesn't work out the way I intended. And the reason that I like that is because I think everybody, when we're learning, we all feel like we're the only person struggling. And I think, like, even when we figure out what we're doing, it still feels that way a lot of the time. Like we make mistakes, we struggle, and it seems like everybody else does it without a problem. We're the only ones struggling. And it's just not the case. And by me being willing to, kind of say that stuff out loud, it reminds you, like, even for somebody like me, I've been at this 30 years. I've been a pro for 30 years. I'm still figuring out every painting and every stroke as I go. And I would make the assertion that any artist who isn't doing it has basically stopped growing. If your painting isn't at risk from the moment you sit down and start working on it, you're just doing stuff you've already done. And that's, again, you can do that, but to me, like what's the point of that? I don't see that. So for me, I like the idea of the paintings being at risk as I work. And if I have a plan, my plans are always kind of loose plans. They're not like, I'm going to do this and then this and then this. Like it's kind of like, okay, so I have this idea that I'm gonna kind of go in this direction and see where it leads. And again, like I said when I first started, like I got this picture like maybe 2 hours ago. I haven't even really looked at it. I just figure, I'll come in and I'll figure it out in front of you, which is terrifying and fun all at once. It's like getting on the first roller coaster of this season and getting to the top of that first drop. You start questioning, what was I thinking?
Emmett shared, it's really true. I often feel like I'm the only one struggling.
We all feel like that, I think. I know a lot of pros, and none of them have unshakable confidence in what they do. Love what they do, and they know that given time, no matter what they're working on, they'll always be able to pull it together. But it's not that the painting is going to go to plan. That there's no guarantee of that, and so they don't go into it expecting that. And I think that's actually a really important thing. If you go into a painting expecting it to go exactly as you plan, you are going to be in trouble, because the painting's not going to play like that. It's going to do what it wants, and you have to problem solve it from start to finish. Right? It's a problem solving event. And making a painting. And so you come into it with the idea that you're just going to do these things and the painting is going to emerge from it. And when it doesn't happen that way, I think a lot of people, and again, this is a matter of a lack of experience, people begin to panic that it didn't go the way they planned, and now what do? And so, like, getting comfortable with the idea that it's not going to go to plan, Right? Don't have a plan that is too well formulated. Just have a general idea of where you're planning on taking the painting, and then kind of play with it. Just let it kind of flow from there. I always equate this to like hopping from one slippery rock to another, like trying to get across a creek. And I think that's a great way to describe it. Like, you know, if you're worried about falling in the water and getting wet, chances are you won't get more than 1 or 2 stones in before you fall. But if you are just having fun jumping from wet stone to wet stone, yeah, you slip around a little bit, but it's not a big deal. Even if you fall, you just get up, kind of laugh it off, and keep moving. And I think like if you can get that kind of a mindset for your painting, you come into your paintings and it doesn't care if you don't care if you fall down, you don't care if you get wet, none of that stuff matters. It's about the the joy of kind of jumping from stone to stone and seeing how it all plays out. And I think that when you get to that point, that's what you see in professionals. They get to the point where they're not worried. They'll just keep playing until the painting kind of, what in the world is that? Until the painting does what it's supposed to do. And again, all I'm doing here is I'm just kind of scrubbing the paint down a little bit back to the board so I can see some of my marks. Just a few landmarks. I want to be able to make sense of some things. It makes it easier for me later on. Don't have everything, and I don't want to disrupt this value too much. If I lift too much paint, I won't be able to see. I won't have this value because the shade of the board will be pushing through. But anyway, so that's pretty much, I think, all of the shadows. And again, I'm just going to go around and make sure that I haven't missed anything. I want to make sure that everything is filled.
Question there.
Nothing's been missed. Yes.
So the hair on that left side, is that a light or a shadow? And
this?
Yeah.
You know what? I've treated it all as one thing because there's some really dark stuff in here. There's some light in here, but I'm kind of treating the hair as one big shape. Like this stuff in here is a little bit lighter than this, and I will build lights up on top of it. But I don't want to. I'm not going to be painting in individual hairs or strands. They're going to be a couple of big, long, bold strokes, and that's it. So I'll drop the lights in on top, and you'll see that when I get to it. I'll get those lights in, and they'll sit in front of these darker shades, and they'll do what they're supposed to do. But in the back here, there's some really dark stuff, just as dark as some of what's back in here. And so easier for me to drop all the darks in, like in here, and then pull the lights in on top. Okay? And so this is a slight deviation from what I would be doing with the ball, but it's basically I'm doing the same thing. I'm laying down a shadow in this place because there are shadow values buried in here. And then I'm going to bring up the lights afterwards.
Mm-hmm. And another question for you.
Yes.
From our comments, how can someone apply this methodology in painting an orange? Do I have to mix 4 colors of orange, or what should I do? And I think this question opens up to, what is the intent behind doing this lesson, Kevin, for us, and how do we apply it to whatever we're painting here?
So the idea is, what we're trying to do here is simplify, right? We're not trying to paint every little thing. We're trying to simplify what we're dealing with, filter it, and make a painting not mark by mark that replicates what we're seeing, but does a good job of describing what we're looking at. We're creating an illusion, something that appears to be 3-dimensional. It doesn't have to be a flawless representation, right? And so what I would say is, if you were painting an orange, like, you wouldn't do the 4 values. You would start, what I would recommend, the way that I teach it, is you would start with a single value, and then you would build out in the direction of your brightest light, not a highlight, but your brightest light, and then in the direction of your shadows. So the first color that you would mix would match the darkest version of the light. And then you would make a value lighter and a value darker to approximate the value of the shadow and the value of the brightest light. So that gives you 3 values, right? The brightest light, right? The overall bright light, the darkest light, and then your shadow. You put those things down, those will give you, just as a block and without any gradients or anything, those will give you a pretty good approximation of an orange. or a banana or a car or anything else, even a face, right? I'm doing this right now. I'm basically using 4 values, but this could be split into 3. Like in the face, I could have dropped in the eyes with this shadow. I could have worked with this shadow and this light, so it would be 1, 2, 3 values, which is what I'm describing, right? So if you look at this palette, ignoring the darks in the eyes, which again, I could have done with this, I would darken them later on. I could have done this for all the shadows, including the eyes, right? We'll ignore the shirt. And then this for all of the things in the light. This would then go in to marry this shadow to this light, right? And so that would give me, when I put this in, it would turn the form for me, give me dimension. When we do it in color, we would mix this one first and then create the light and create the shadow from it. Anyway, I hope that makes sense. But the idea here is that we're simplifying, right? If I look at her photograph, I need like 25 different values just in the shadows, right? And it's such a complicated mess. And you have to paint almost every single mark individually if you do that, where here I can really generalize, which is what I want to do. I want to be general to start and then get more and more focused and refined with my marks as I go. And again, you'll see that. I'm going to pull her together. And I mean, it's funny, like there's not much going on here, but she's already feeling solid because of this big mass and this big mass. And then the lights out here and in here are large masses as well, even though there's nothing in them yet. So anyway, going back to the ball. Keep that up there. So once I've got my shadows in, the next thing to do is I now assess my lights. And in this case, I have 2 lights. Can we see this?
No, not really.
Okay. So we have 2 lights here on the ball and 1 on the table. So I'm going to ignore the highlight because if I have 4 objects, that highlight, if their materials are similar, the highlight's going to be the same on all of them. So I'm going to ignore the highlight. I'm just going to look at this shade against this shade. This one's darker, this one's lighter. So the darker one is going to be my moderate light, and this one's going to be my extreme light. And so I'm now just going to paint in my moderate light, and then I'll do the same on the face, on the portrait, and then I'll do my extreme light, do the same on the portrait, and then we'll start turning form. Right? From the standpoint of simplicity, I like the idea of 4 shades. And I'm going to explain why. Right? Most grayscales are like 11 or 12 values, okay? Right, if you see them, you got like strips that are grayscale, they'll be like 11 or 12 values. There's this idea that was put forth. I believe it was Malcolm Gladwell who first presented the idea, 10,000 hours to develop mastery in a skill, right? And I think it's fair to say that idea has been utterly and completely debunked. But the idea is that if you commit 10,000 hours to developing a skill, you will have mastery. That's what they found when they started looking at people who do things, the ones who committed that kind of time and energy to developing it, or they work a particular job. It's at about 10,000 hours that they could say they've mastered that thing. The reason that I say that it's been debunked is that obviously, a neurosurgeon and a guy that makes balloon animals for children, their skill sets are different. And 10,000 hours to a neurosurgeon might not even break the surface of what they need to know to be considered masterful at what they do. And a guy who does balloon animals might be the god of all balloon animal people at 10,000 hours, right? And so there's a disparity there because of the number of skills that those 2 things require. And it's not a hit on balloon animal guys. I don't know what the range of skills are there. But anyway, so if we kind of take the idea, because the idea has merit, we take the idea and we say, let's say that each individual skill that adds up to the whole takes 1 hour to master, right? So, you know, a neurosurgeon might have 30,000 individual skills that they have to master. 1 hour each means 30,000 hours to mastery. The balloon animal guy might have 400 skills, so it's only 400 hours to develop mastery, right? So the idea here is, with this range, we're covering almost the full 12 values. We're missing white and we're missing black, but everything else that we need is here, and I would make the assertion that no self-respecting artist would ever use black or white as they come out of the tube. They will always pull in a little bit from that so that you have something very dark and very light, but never pure white, never pure black. So we have the full range from here to here. What we're missing is all the values in between. We only have 2 where there would be like maybe 9. And so what I've in effect done is eliminated 66% of the values of a typical grayscale. Meaning that if each value takes 1 hour to develop mastery, this takes 4 where the other palette takes 12. Now that's just each value. When you put them up here, they interact. If you have 12 values, each value is interacting with the others. It's like 144 interactions, right? 12 by 12. This is 16 interactions. That's a big difference if you're trying to master something and each one of those things requires an hour. We use a set number of brush strokes. We don't just randomly place paint. We use this brush in a particular way. We only use, say, 3 or 4 different strokes, because those strokes, the more you do them, the better you get at them. If you're just randomly moving the brush around, every stroke you make is a novice stroke. So what we want to do is get command over it, master it, and so we are committed to very limited number of things. Set palette of just 4 values, just a few types of brush strokes, things like that. But that's actually why we do this, and why I've simplified things this way, and why when you're dealing with something like this, this palette works equally well for the ball as it does for the portrait, because of its simplicity. You don't have so many things that you have to manage, right? Right? It's almost like having a toolbox. You have a hammer and a screwdriver and a pair of pliers. No matter what the job is, you'll know if the hammer's not the right tool, right? You know, it's glass, probably not a job for the hammer, right? But it's like, you know, if you have a limited number of tools, it doesn't take much to figure out which one is the right tool. If you have a toolbox with 100 tools, it could take you forever to figure out which tool, and even then, maybe not even get it right, figuring out which tool is right for the job you're working on. You might not even recognize it if you saw it. So simplicity is our friend in this. And you'll see, it doesn't lead to a simple painting. It's just a simple approach. And that's, if it led to a remedial painting, it wouldn't have any value, right? Less values in a remedial painting, that doesn't have much value to us. It only has value if we can do the same thing with these values as we would with a value scale of 12.
Here's a question. When could we consider ourselves professional artists? When did you begin to call yourself a professional?
I started to call myself a professional based on what the definition of a professional is. I was making a living at this, right? And so you can say if you make some money that you're a professional. To me, if you're making a living at it, you're doing just this, then you would call yourself a pro. Until then, you're still an amateur. And I don't remember the root of amateur is actually a very positive thing. I don't remember what it is. I remember seeing it somewhere, because you always wonder, like, you call somebody an amateur, and it's like, is that a hit on them? But an amateur is somebody who's aspiring to that, is on that path and is aspiring to it. And so for me, I think when you are making a living at this, that's when you call yourself a pro, right? Up until then, you're still kind of traveling the path in that direction. And that way, like, when you say you're a professional, it has some weight, right? I think that matters also. a lot of people as artists, they're not treated very well. People don't perceive art, they don't perceive it as a career. There's so many negative connotations that go with it. And part of it is that anybody who sells anything thinks they're a pro, and they throw that word around. But it's like when you say you're a professional, like I can tell you when I would tell people that I was an artist, I'd get this, like everybody, like all the time, this look of pity. Like, oh, you're one of them. And then when I would show them what I do, they're like, oh, you're a real artist, right? And it's like, it's the same thing. Like, you say you're a professional artist, like there has to be something behind it. It's like, what's behind it? What's behind it to me is I pay all my bills with this. I don't have to do anything else. I get up in the morning, I work a 9 to 5 or a 9 to 11 at night, 9 in the morning to 11 at night, and people pay me for my work, and it's all I do. It's all I have to do to make a living. Now again, that's for me. You can look at it differently. Most people, if they're making some of their income from this, they consider themselves professional. You've got amateur, you've got pro, but you've also got semi-pro. Semi-pro is somebody, in my mind, they're definitely on their way to being a full-time professional painter, but they're not quite there yet, right? And it kind of, when you do talk to people, if you're using that kind of terminology, it shows that you've been thinking about how you title yourself, right? And I think that there's some respect to be had for that from people who we're talking to, that we're not overstating our position. And again, especially like artists tend to get a bad rap. Most people, they don't, when they're thinking in terms of art as a career, they don't know how to separate the word starving from artist. And that's unfortunate. It's unfortunate because it deters people from getting into this. People who could make a living at it and have a wonderful life from it. I know that most parents, when their child says they want to be an artist of any kind, they cry themselves to sleep at night. I want to be a musician, or I want to be a dancer. It's a wonderful thing as a hobby, but most people are afraid of it because they worry about their kids being able to take care of themselves. It's almost like like a 7-year-old kid wanting to be a cowboy. Living in the Bronx. Like around the Midwest, that's okay, but if you live in the Bronx and you want to grow up and be a cowboy, that's a pipe dream. And unfortunately, in a lot of cases, art kind of falls into that kind of dreaming in the minds of most people, right? And I say, like, from the standpoint of how you define what you are, if you're an artist, you're part of this community. Whether you're an amateur, a semi-pro, a pro, a world-renowned artist, you're part of this community. You're part of this, you're part of the history of art, which is everybody. It's Michelangelo, and it's the caves, the cave painters, and it's everybody. You're part of that history, whether you're making a living at it or not. And so what you do reflects on all of us. Like everything I do reflects on all of us. And so it's like, to me, there's a responsibility in that you make sure that you represent yourself well. When you talk about what you do, like, there's no special terminology for art. If you wouldn't be considered a pro in one field, saying you're a pro in another wouldn't make sense. In the same position wouldn't make sense, right? And so just think about that when you're deciding how you define yourself. But again, it's just a word, and you're going to define yourself by it. It's, to me, you make a living, you make money at it, or you don't make money at it, you make some, or you make all of what you earn, or you just do it for fun. Do it because you love it. Don't worry about the rest. Like, the title doesn't mean anything. It really doesn't. It's just a word, And it's not for you. It's the word's for other people, right? Saying you're professional isn't for you. You know what you are. You get up every day and you work. That word is really for other people. So, again, lots of kind of stuff just thrown out there on that. But like I said, you can decide for yourself how you use that language. Okay, so I've got the one moderate light on the table done. I'm going to move back over to the portrait. So I think in the shirt, we're gonna get the moderate shadow, the moderate light, and that's it, just the shirt.
As a follow-up to that question about becoming a professional artist,
Yes.
what do you think of artists who have the skill but can't sell to save their lives?
It's terrible. It's terrible because there are some really, really good artists out there who the business end of it just eats them alive. The bottom line is that, it's unfortunate. It's really terrible. And look, there are people out there, there are agents who bridge the gap, right? But they take a piece of what you earn in exchange for that. And a lot of artists, they lean on those agents, they lean on those galleries because they don't have the ability, they're not comfortable, they don't have the skills, they don't, whatever it is, they're not able to bridge that gap and find those clients. I would say that the same way that you need to know how to work with different brushes and different paint, and right, like you can paint in grayscale, but you have to be able to paint in color too, right? That's a different skill, or it's an elevated version of this, right? Filberts are fine, but do you know how to use a stippling brush? Can you use can you use these different brushes, like different mediums, like understanding your trade, your vocation, right? All of these different things that make it possible for you to make a painting. One of the skills you have to develop in order to be a professional artist is the ability to negotiate the business terrain. You have to be able to interact with people. You have to be able to cultivate relationships that generate business, right? If you can't do it, then you have to pay someone else to do it. And, when I first got into doing portrait work, and there's a good lesson in this. When I first got into doing portrait work, I went and I didn't know much about the industry, but I decided that I wanted to dip a toe in it. And so the first thing I did was educate myself. I went to Portraits Inc., which is arguably the premier portrait broker in the country, maybe in the world. I am not sure, but basically it's a brokerage firm, and they handle a stable of several hundred artists, portrait painters. And if you're a portrait painter, that's a place to be, because you're going to be seen by people who are actively looking to have portraits done. And again, they have a good reputation. And so let me say, they used to have a good reputation. I have no idea what the reputation is now. Good or bad, I don't know. But they used to have a really good reputation. And so if you were somebody who knew nothing about portraits and wanted to commission one, it would make a lot of sense to go to Portraits Inc. and sit down with their people and go through portfolios and pick an artist with their help. They would take care of the whole process for you, and you didn't really need to know anything, right? And it doesn't cost you more because the artist is the one who's giving the kickback to the broker. And so what I did in order to educate myself is I went down there as a potential client. And I went down there and I sat down and I let them walk me through their sales pitch. They thought I was a potential buyer. And I ate up maybe about 2 hours of their time going through portfolios and asking all kinds of questions. One, I wanted the answers, but also I wanted to see how they were selling them. I wanted to see what it was they were doing to make a sale. How did they push an artist, right? So there were things like you could have an artist that was $70,000 for a portrait, and they were immediately available. If you wanted to paint, you could get it started today. There were other artists that were $30,000, and you would have to wait 7 months, right? And so the $70,000 guy is not working, and the $30,000 guy is busy, right? And I was looking for information like that. Where's the sweet spot? Where are all of the artists busy? Where would my work fall quality-wise into this grouping? And so eventually, I figured out where I fit price-wise, and based on quality and what I felt a large enough percentage of the portraits were being done because of how busy these artists were. And then I was able to undercut those prices by like 25% and still make more money than the artist working for the brokerage firm, which was coughing up like 40%. I think it was 40% at the time. Right? So I was undercutting the price of those people and I was being paid more. Right? So if, let's say I was charging $10,000 for a portrait, or let's say $10,000 was what Portraits Inc. was charging for a portrait, and I cut down 25%, I would charge $7,500. So I would be charging $7,500 where Portraits Inc. would charge $10,000. So I was 25% less. But the artist was only getting $6,000. So I was charging less and making more at the same time. And it was just that I was comfortable going out and cultivating clients. And you have to understand, I grew up poor. I didn't grow up in a place where I had access to wealthy people, but I was confident that I could access them. And so once I knew that I was in the right spot with the price and everything else, and I knew what the competition looked like, and I knew that I was undercutting their prices, I was very confident going out into the world with that and starting to build a career. But it's like you have to educate yourself. Like with anything that you would do, you educate yourself. This is a fight, right? You wouldn't go and get into a boxing ring if you didn't work out, right? If you didn't study boxing a little bit, at least a little bit, and run every day and be in shape, right? You wouldn't get into a boxing ring for a fight. Yet people will go out into the world, right? You know, and engage in battle to find work and be ill prepared. Like they've done no research, they've not prepared themselves for it, right? And so one of the big things is going in and figuring out exactly what you're dealing with before you start to try to cultivate a career. Know what the challenges are, learn what they are. And that's going to spare you a lot of grief. It's going to make life easier. You're going to be able to bend the curve and find that path to a living quicker. So anyway, so I've got my moderate my moderate light in on the shirt. And now I'll move back over to the ball. Put my extreme light in. Right, and you can see, one step at a time. It's exactly the same right now. And again, the ball is going to be a little bit lighter in the painting than what's in the photograph. But I'm not trying to copy the photograph. I'm trying to create a representation that explains that the ball is lighter than the table. And so what I'm doing here describes a ball that is lighter than the table it's sitting on. In the painting, it's a little bit lighter than in the photograph, but that's okay. As you get the technique down better, you no longer are stuck with grayscale. You move to color, and then you're being a lot more specific about what these shades are because you're mixing them. They're not random. Like these shades that I have on the palette, they came straight out of a tube. I didn't match them to anything in these photographs. These are standardized grays that we use in the program. And all they do is represent 2 shades of shadow and 2 shades of light without any consideration beyond that. Right? And so there's my 4 values in place on the ball. The face, because of all of the little shapes, is going to be a bit more work than that. Just get a little bit of this and thin it down a bit. Again, I'll probably have to build it back up later on with thicker paint when I'm going and I finish up my highlights. But this will give me a good placeholder as I'm working. I'm trying to get it about the same thickness as what I had here that I put in for the shadows. If I find it's too thin, I'll just bulk it up a little bit. I'm just going to figure out what brush I am filling with. Okay. Just everything that's not a shadow is now going to get this shade. And I'm careful to prevent it from getting contaminated. I don't want to drag any of the shadow that's down into the light. And make sure that I'm not contaminating this either as I go. Again, I'm not blending anything. Right now, each thing is taking its own space, trying not to like drag one thing into another. All of the gradients, all the fades that are created are going to be created with intent. So I don't want it to happen accidentally, right? So you can see all these shades that are really quite pristine. I don't want them to get messy. And you can see, like, as I do this, I constantly mixing whatever I take off of there into here. If I see I grab this accidentally, I'll wipe the brush before I even go here so that this value stays clean. And again, I try to keep the paint relatively even. I don't want big bluffs. Oh, I missed a shadow in here. See, you look around, but that doesn't mean you don't miss stuff. Not really sure how I missed all this. I'm trying not to let too much paint build up. I want to keep everything nice and flat if I can. I'll come back in with a smaller brush and get into all these little tight spaces once I've got the bigger shapes filled.
It is 9:05, just so you know.
There'll be no jokes about like ending early tonight, even though it feels like it's going to be one of those nights.
Here's some cool comments
Okay.
from Legendary Noob. So grateful that Kevin decided to teach and share this worldwide. I never knew there were any fundamentals for painting, and anyone could learn to paint if they really want it and are willing to work for it. Kevin, you often talk about accountants. I do work in finance, and I dread it. I'm hoping to make the transition into art someday soon. Your life story and how you got into art is a real inspiration for me. Huge thanks.
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate it. I do this for that reason. There are people out there who are doing, working, they were born to be artists and they're doing something else. And maybe this illuminates the path for them. and I think I got lucky. I got lucky. I mean, I stumbled upon people who were willing to help me. I really did get lucky. And it's never lost on me, and I make a point of sharing. I wouldn't be here if not for the generosity of so many other people. And so I make a point of giving back. I mean, it's in my nature anyway, but I just really, like, every day I wake up, I know how lucky I am. And it is luck. All the skill in the world doesn't help you if you don't stumble into the right rooms at the right times. That's unfortunately the nature of life. I've been very fortunate, very lucky. And so I try to pay that forward as often as I can. I don't ever want to lose track of that, like how lucky I've been. I think it's easy to forget. You just get far enough removed from your beginnings. As you can see, I mean, this is, like, she's already feeling pretty solid. She's coming along very nicely. Right? And again, like, there's not a lot going on. Not a lot going on. It's exactly the same thing, right? And now, this, as basic as this is, this looks complicated, but, right, I've done exactly the same thing. This is just different shapes. Many, many more bends and turns and things. But it's still the same 4 shades, and you can see it already has a nice solid feel to it. Now, we're now going to turn the form in the ball. We're going to create a gradient, which is going to basically take what is a flat circle and fill it with air and make it round. And once we've got that, we'll fill the background and finish this off. And then I'll turn my attention here and I'll start, again, she's very flat right now. I'll start filling this. Again, I always think of it as a flattened balloon. We're going to fill it with air and round everything out. And again, I could leave this alone. I don't even need to do anything in here. Now that this is in, it looks so nice. Once I start turning this form, you won't even notice this is undone. So again, remember, we're talking about simplicity. So when we start, we have 4 shades and there's nothing else, right? Not too hard to, it doesn't get confusing. Once we've got everything in place, now we're going to bridge the gaps between these shades. So in the ball, I have this shadow with this light. I'm going to start by putting this down as a barrier to separate the shadows from the lights. It just fits in between them. Now, when I do the portrait, I'm actually going to make the gradients in a different way. I'm going to kind of break from what we do in the program, and because it's easier for me to just turn the form without the formula. But I want you to see the formula here. So basically, between my shadow and my light, which is what I have on the ball, this shade falls. And between them, it's going to be used basically to hold the line between where the shadow and the light meet. And I want to make it solid. Very important. It's got to be solid. I'm going to work it and I'm getting rid of the separation between the 2 shades that were underneath. Right? So I want to make sure that I can't see that original edge where the shadow and the light meet. I want that buried. And that's basically all I'm doing. And it already starts to turn the form for me. I'm just going to make sure the edges don't have any excess paint on them. right? It's easy for the paint to build up on the edge. So I'm just going to make sure that there's no excess paint. Right, and so now, where originally the shadow and the light, there was a big value jump, this now kind of splits the difference, and now it already starts to make the ball feel more rounded. All I'm going to do now is dissolve the edge here where the shadow and this buffer meet, and then I'll dissolve the edge where the light and the buffer meet, and that will give us our volume. And then I'll fill in the background and clean up any outer edges that got messed up along the way. So to dissolve the edge between the shadow and the buffer, what we're going to do, like I could just rub this together, but in doing that I'm going to be lifting paint, and the gradients need to have paint. There needs to be a nice amount of paint there. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab a little bit of my shadow shade and about an equal amount of my light shade, and I'm going to create a value that fits in between these, right? So we didn't start out with 12 values, but we're going to build this out a little bit. Mixing these together, I create a mixture, I create a value, an admixture that fits between them. It'll be dark compared to this, but light compared to this. Right? I still see there's a little more room, a little bit more light in here. The closer to an even split between the two values, the easier it'll be to blend that edge. Right? So I want to see it light against this and dark against this. So that's actually pretty good. And I make sure it's thoroughly mixed. I don't want it to be marbled. It's got to be well mixed. Once I've got this, I'm going to load up the brush. I want to make sure this is the only shade on the brush, so I really kind of load it up. And then I'm going to wipe it. And then I just want a tiny little bit of paint. You'll see, I mean, it really doesn't go very far. I'm not looking to make another stripe. What I'm looking to do is, imagine if I took my pinky and I just kind of blended this edge, like if I was a child with pastels, smudging with my pinky. I'm going to use the brush in the same way. And I'm just going to kind of dust over the edge with the brush in no particular direction, just kind of trying to smudge, make the edge disappear. And I'm going to go back, grab a little bit more, continue. Very gentle. And you notice the brush doesn't bend under the weight of my hand. If it did, this edge would become, I'd wind up basically putting down another line, another stripe. So the brush doesn't bend under the weight of my hand. I'm just barely skimming the surface. And you can see I keep going back and getting more. I can only go maybe about 3/4 of an inch at a time before it starts making a bit of a mess. So now that that's softened, right, you see this edge compared to this edge, this is now starting to grade, starting to fade. I'll go over it again. Now I can do a little bit more because it's already softened. Just kind of go over it. And again, I'm just looking for places where there are still kind of like discernible edges. And I'm just trying to kind of smooth them out and knock them down, and neutralize them. And again, doesn't have to be silk smooth, just needs to be that there's no recognizable edge. That's all we're looking for. And then I can do the same on the other side. Between my light and my buffer, I'll mix these two together. And this shade, mix it completely. There should be a light against this and dark against that. That's all we're looking for. Again, the closer to a perfect middle value between the two, the smoother it'll be when it blends, the easier it'll be to get that blend. Another brush for this.
Question for you.
Yes.
I imagine from an evolved student.
Yes.
Why isn't Kevin using the blade of the brush to blend?
I do everything. This is a panel and the paint slips around on it differently, but you can do it this way on canvas as well. You know, we've redone the videos for Block 1 where I'm teaching gradients so many times, and there are add-on videos, and did we ever get the one that I did here posted? Like 2 hours doing a video here on gradients. Did we ever get it posted?
Here?
Yeah, I did them. Remember, we redid them. over there?
Back in the fall,
Yeah.
I don't believe so. I'm not aware.
Okay, well, anyway, we constantly updating and upgrading and trying to make better sense of this based on what the students are doing. I'm not using the blade edge, one, because this surface is going to make it a little bit harder to work on. The paint really slips on this because there's no texture to it, right? So that's one thing. But you can actually do, like what you see me doing here, you can actually do this, use the brush this way on canvas and test that out and see how that works for you. I did a video showing it this way, but it seems that we've not got it posted. That needs to be posted so people can see it.
Understood.
Okay. So, but yes, you can play around with this. If you're in the program, you're seeing this, you can play around with this and see if it gives you an easier result, right? Because as long as you're getting the result and you're not fighting, that's what we want, right? All of the techniques work. I can make gradients 1,000 different ways. I could make a gradient without even using a brush. I just use my finger and blend it. But we want to get something that's a little bit more standardized, and so the blade edge of the brush is one way to do it. This is another. Okay? You can see the application is basically the same, but and when we say the blade edge of the brush, for those of you who don't know, instead of using the brush this way, I'm using it this way, right? I'm turning it on its side, right? So blade edge of the brush would be this, as opposed to this. So we teach it, I teach it using the blade edge of the brush, but we do have other videos where I'm using the flat edge for people who are struggling using the blade edge. But feel free to give this an attempt. You can see how I'm doing it here. And we'll try to get that other video live soon so that you can see this technique. Again, so here, same thing, just half in the buffer, half in the light, and I just very, very gently kind of just really kind of like massage the edge. And again, a gradient, by definition, is just an edge that doesn't have a discernible start and end to the two values that you're marrying. That's all it is, right? So here there's a discernible edge, or here there's a discernible edge. It's razor sharp. In here, there's no discernible edge. There's no place where you can say the shadow ends there and the buffer begins here. They're just going to fade. They happen. It happens in a space, but it's not. You can't pinpoint it. That's all a gradient is that there's no discernible space where you can say that's exactly where one thing ends and another begins. Right. So here, like I'm using the blade edge of the brush now. Again, not even thinking about it, but just the angle that I'm at and just not being able to kind of rotate the painting. I'm using the blade edge of the brush, and it's hard. Like, I don't have one technique. I have like 1,000 things. I throw everything at the painting. And so I'm not even thinking which edge of the brush I'm using or what brush I'm using. I'm just, whatever fits my hand and makes sense in the moment is what I do, right? And so like the bottom edge of the gradient, I use the flat edge of the brush. Now I'm using the blade edge. And I know I'm going to go back to the flat edge to kind of finish this off. But as long as I'm getting the gradient and I'm working with, like, to make the gradient, as long as you're using the 5 values, doesn't matter what you do with the brush. As long as the 5 values are in, the shadow goes down, the light goes down, then the buffer, and then you're using these 2 admixtures to dissolve those edges. As long as you're doing that, what you do with the brush is really irrelevant. So again, kind of play around with that. But don't shortcut the process. Make sure you're using your buffer and your admixtures. And you can see it just very, very gently dissolving this edge. And again, it's already softened. Oh, I've just got a terrible angle on this. Like, for me to get in here and like not block the camera, it's hard. And this is finesse work. Like, you don't. I'm going to turn this. Trying not to drag any of this into this space. Trying to keep my light out here, my shadow in here, and only working at the edges of the buffer to create the gradient. I don't want to drag things back and forth. I can't work over here and then over here. It's only on one side of the buffer at a time. And I don't go from this edge to this edge in here. Again, I need to keep these values separated as I go. So that's actually pretty good. I can take a soft brush and just kind of play over these edges a little bit. And just to, again, working on the board is different than canvas. I have no choice but to go in with a dry brush after this, after the values are in place. I just kind of work over them and knock them down. Because the canvas has all the texture, the paint gets embedded. This is just swimming around on the surface. And so I have no choice but to go in and kind of smooth it out a little bit. Again, the thinking is identical. I'm not changing my thinking, but how the paint is applied on the board is different. And anyone who's worked on an illustration board, you know, like these things, they can be slick as glass. The paint is just so easy to lift the paint that you put down. So, and you can see the brush barely bends. I'm just barely skimming the surface of the painting to blend this stuff. My last edge. Again, you notice they're not long strokes in one direction. They're constantly breaking up that edge. Ins and outs. So that's a pretty decent gradient. Again, no absolute point where you could say that's where one thing starts and the other thing ends, right? Well, that's a lot more work on the panel than it is on canvas. Filling is easier, but the gradients are always much more work on a panel. So now that's done, I'm actually going to go and I'm going to fill in my background. And I'm going to use, I always want to use one of the shades from this bottom row because all the shades in here in the object and on the table are pulled from the top row. So if I use something from the top row, I could potentially lose an edge. So if I use these from the bottom row, it's not going to match any of the shades that are down. So there'll be a little bit of its distinction. In this case, I'm going to work between these two shades. And again, I want a shade that looks like it falls, in between. Try to make sure it's no marbling, that the paint is thoroughly mixed. Right? And again, I can see light against that, dark against that. Some extra oil. And I'll use this to just clean up my edges as I go. Where are we on time?
It is 9:25.
So, as I was saying earlier when we first started, tonight is my last night for probably until September. You may see my face, but I'm not going to be painting. I may stop in while our live streams are going, but I'm actually not going to be painting. My apprentice, May, is going to be working on a painting over the next, 8 to 10 weeks, and she'll be picking up, starting on Sunday.
That is correct. Yep.
So starting this Sunday at 8 o'clock?
Yep.
So this Sunday, 8 o'clock Eastern Standard, May will be jumping in and she'll be starting a painting and hopefully seeing it through over 10 weeks to completion. So you'll be able to see one of my top students at work. And again, she doesn't do everything that I do the way I do it. She knows what she's doing. She's been trained. And so now she kind of takes and leaves what she wants and just produces art. Not sure. I think she's going to be working on a figure painting. I believe that's the plan.
Yep.
Right, and she's actually on the other side. She's usually here working when we're doing these. So she's going to come over once I want to get a little bit further down the road into this, and then we'll invite her over, and you get a chance to meet her. For those of you who haven't met her already, I think she's popped in once or twice over the time while we've been doing these. But you get a chance to meet her, and then, like I said, when she starts working on her painting, you'll be able to ask her questions. So make sure you're nice to her.
Yeah, and it is possible we will move it back to 7 p.m. start time, since people won't be coming home from work on the western coast. So sometime around in the evening on Sunday is when we'll start. And I'll have those details posted up by tomorrow morning for everyone.
Again, so last I'm going to make a gradient on the horizon line, and that's going to help to push this back. Now, this is my background and this is my table, so I probably just grab one shade. This should be enough, and I should be able to just dissolve the edge. And I'm just going to kind of play with the edge and see if I can make it break down. Right, it's just that this value falls in between the two that I'm trying to blend. Once I'm done, I'll touch up anything that I mess up. All right, so I can kind of get this in place. I'm going to go back to my background shade and try to dissolve the top edge, and then I'll go back to my tabletop shade and dissolve the bottom edge. So here, just a small amount of paint on the brush and just try to fade this. Again, remember, it doesn't have to be silk smooth. It just has to dissolve the edge so that we can't pinpoint where one edge, where the background ends and the table begins. We want to just dissolve one thing into another. Right, and these values are close enough together. They play nicely. It's not too much of a fight. This paint is very wet. I put a lot of oil in it, so brush marks are a little bit more obvious as I go. And then the tabletop, which was this one. And again, get whatever contaminants are in the brush, get it neutralized. And then we'll do the same on the bottom edge. You can see the contamination here. And I'm just gonna that's actually, I think I'm good there. Stop right there with the ball. So I'm now going to move over and I'm going to deal with the portrait. Again, same thing, I'm just going to turn the form. I'm going to be a little bit, I'm going to approach the gradients a little different. I want to just kind of, I'm going to get the buffer shade on the brush. I'm just going to bend the paint to my will here. So the gradients are going to kind of expand and contract. They're different sizes and shapes. So again, on the face, this is my shadow and this is my light. This one is my buffer shade. And so I'm just going to load the brush up with this. I'm going to test it, see how it plays. Yeah, so this is looking good. So in here, I'm just going to establish the shape of the transition and then fade it into the shadow. I'm basically going to do this now every place where there's a gradient. And just gently fade it into the places where it goes. And again, I'm not even really that worried about making it smooth. There's so much texture in her skin. You don't have to do very much. I'm probably just going to leave this texture in place. I'm just feeling like I don't need to really take it out.
Kevin, would you mind sliding the panel over to your right just a little bit?
This way?
Yep. A little bit less. Right there. Thanks.
Again, just dissolve the edge. And again, I'm paying attention to the shapes here. I'm not just randomly dissolving. I'm paying attention to what the shapes look like to try to mimic them.
Question for you, Kevin.
Yes.
Who is the lady in this painting?
Oh, I have no idea. She's a stock photo. I just thought she had a great look. So I was torn. I found this one and I found a gentleman, really, really clean angular features. And I just, at the last minute, I settled on her. I just thought, she's just got a great look for this, for what we're doing here. Originally, I was looking for an older gentleman as a subject, but I couldn't find what I was looking for. So, you know, I've painted a number of well, the two portraits, the grayscale and the color portrait of that one girl. I wanted to kind of mix it up so everybody can see it. You know, you see these different, even like different skin tones, and I want to get into doing a lot of that. Different flesh tones, young skin, old skin, kind of people that are a little heavier, a little thinner. As time goes by, we'll be kind of hitting all of that stuff so that you can see it being done. You know, none of this stuff is a one-size-fits-all, right? And just the overarching ideas about what we do here apply to anything. If the skin tone were darker, this would be the skin tone instead of this one probably, right? And so the shadows would be darker, the lights would be darker. And maybe the shirt would be this shadow with this light. And so then you see the skin being darker than the material and the surroundings. And it keys in and tells your brain that the skin tone is dark as opposed to simply being darker lighting. But again, like the ideas are the same. They don't change on, you know, skin tones. It's funny, like skin tones, everything from like albino up to like what you would think of as black skin, not like really dark, not like Haitian, which is like really like extremely dark. But everything up to what you would think of as like typical black skin is all mixed from exactly the same colors. All that's different is the value range. It's incredible to see it on the palette when you do it, that you can mix like the skin of somebody from like Great Britain and from Mexico and from Italy and from Africa, all with the same palette. It's pretty cool. So, but anyway, we will get around to doing that stuff. It's a lot of fun to play with. You know, the same skin tones over and over and over. It's monotonous, right? The same faces, like, you know, everything is, you know, pretty smooth transitions. You know, there's nothing more fun to me than painting like an old, craggly-looking person. The wrinkles are so much fun to put in, even though they don't want the wrinkles painted in. It's like, you know, this clients always ask to have that stuff taken out. It's so much fun to paint. And again, I'm going to have to get down to a smaller brush here in a moment. Just kind of paying attention to where these things are. And Daniel, do me a favor, just make sure we don't run out of time. I don't want to bring May in very late. Let's say like 10:30.
Okay. It's 9:40 now.
Okay. I think, and we may even get there before then.
Another question for you.
Yes.
How much do models cost, and what type of contracts do you sign for a model?
Models, so I try to stay away from professional models. It's just my preference. For many years as an illustrator, I used professional models, and I was never really happy with them. I found that normal people, just normal everyday people, made better models. And so, like, I would stay away from pros. To me, they all kind of look the same, and they behave the same in front of the camera. They look like models. They feel like models. Normal people are so much more interesting. They have a lot more character in most cases. And so, and for that, like, it's just whatever you offer. I mean, somebody is interested in sitting down and letting you paint them, like do a photo shoot so you can paint them, $25, $50 for an hour of their time, maybe an hour and a half of their time. And then maybe you give them $25 and a print of the painting when you're finished. You know, the print of the painting is more valuable to them in most cases than the cash, right? So, but, you know, it all depends on where you are and who you're asking, you know? So there's no one fee, but like we do, like when we have kids come in and model for like the summer programs, we generally pay like $50 for the photo shoot. And it could be anywhere from 1 to 2 hours, somewhere in there. But that's about it. Professional models will run you, I think they're like $150 an hour, something like that. And you got to pay for like their time traveling, and so they're prohibitively expensive, or they can be. And so again, I've got to get in with a smaller brush. Still just trying to manage turning the form. Again, I can only get in, again, for what I'm doing, I can only get in, I'm kind of just tapping them in and just trying to give the impression of that volume. I'm not refining. But if I wanted to, I could kind of really lean in, get a maul stick, and go in with an even smaller brush and really kind of work this stuff. And the painting would become very refined in relatively quick order. Okay, so that gradient is done. And again, I like to put the buffer down and then dissolve the edges. Right? And you can see the buffer is bigger here, thinner here. I expand it and contract it based on how much of a gradient I'm trying to create. Some gradients are very small and some are relatively large. In order to create something that feels like it is, like it's very large, you know, like again, like a big giant drum, rather than like the turn on the nose. The turn on the nose is going to happen in very small spaces of gradients, but on a big drum or even on something like a pot, the gradient is going to sprawl. So like I can have this gradient sprawl. You look at that buffer went down, it's almost an inch. This one is barely the thickness of the brush because it's turning a much smaller form. And again, just kind of going over this, looking, where do I need to turn form? Every mark is calculated. No marks are accidental. Really take my time making sure that I'm putting these marks where they go. And for now, I'm just trying to get everything in and then I'll go around and I'll grade everything. So sure. And there's a lot of kind of movement in here from the darker shadow back in here towards that light. And so I'm almost having to fill it. It's still a buffer, but it becomes a big shape. And it'll get graded in here and out here. I just want to make sure I'm getting that covered well. Here. Okay. All right, so in the grand scheme of things, there wasn't a lot of places to have to go in and do gradients. This is all good. This is going to be a bit of a gradient in here too. Right? And again, every single edge, when I'm putting that buffer in, it's managed based on what the final edge is going to look like. Being very careful about that. And again, you know, I'm thinking cast and form. Cast shadows being sharp, form shadows where they meet on a curve are gradients. I'm thinking through those filters as I'm working. Not just randomly following these edges and just putting paint down. I'm thinking, this is sharp edge, this is a gradient. Bridge of the nose is in front of this, where this just is rounded form. So anyway, from here, I'm just going to go and I'm going to soften these edges. I'll start by blending back into my shadows. And again, I'm constantly referring back to my reference material. I'm not inventing this. In the end, if I don't like the way something looks based on following the reference material, I'll go in and I'll change it. But I start by following my reference material. Again, just in the interest of keeping my brush from contaminating from the shadow and the light, I only work on the shadowed side, and then I'll wipe the brush, and then I'll only work on the lit side. If I find somewhere along the line that I need to push a shadow back in, I just go back to my shadow shade, There's a time in the painting process where I can go in and kind of clean up anything that's not the way I want it to be. Again, I'm just gonna, this is my buffer shade. Now that I've finished doing all of my, well, I missed this one. I'm basically cleaning the brush with that paint so that I can now do the lit side of these gradients. I'm gonna have to go back up and do this eye, but I wanna make sure I don't have any of this shadow on the brush when I go in here. So. And again, delicate work. Very gentle as I'm doing this. See, these edges are nice and soft. Again, some things are softer than others. Some gradients are really soft. Some of them happen in a very small space, so they bend the corner fast. Others sprawl and they let the form kind of just roll slowly. And so I'm just being thoughtful about that as I'm doing this. Like, what kind of a gradient am I dealing with? Each one I want to treat differently. Okay, guess what we're doing today? We're going to give this away. It's done. So what do we do? Do you have an email address for this? To email in? To be part of a...
I'll have to make something real quick, like a quick Google form.
Can you do
Kevin?
it while we're working?
Yeah, but it'll take a few minutes.
Okay, well, so when I'm done with this, we're going to take information and we'll raffle this off, I guess, on Sunday. We'll raffle it off on Sunday and we'll ship it out like we did those other paintings. And again, so it's just a fun little exercise. So, I mean, I've got all those gradients in place. Let me just go back in and deal with this darker one over here. I think that that's all of them. I do have to soften this edge a little. And again, just soften it a little bit. Same with the lips. I'm just softening the edge of the lips just a little bit. So sharp. So now that I've got that done, I'm now going to go back to the ball and I'm going to put in reflections and highlights. Oh, actually, I gotta do gradients down here too. Okay, so between this shadow and this light on the shirt, this one is my buffer. Grab that. All right, and so in here, just again, just try to blend this. My darker shade is already drying, so it is going to be a fist fight. Just going to have to kind of force it. I'll have to go back in with my darker shade to dissolve the back edge. In fact, actually, this might work. Okay, I'm going to use this as my buffer. I'm going to use this shade. Normally, I would use this between these two, but this is already drying on here. It's not coming up really. So this will blend easier with this, even though it's kind of drying. And again, you just kind of adjust as you go. So this is allowing me to kind of blend that. Not really that concerned with making it that smooth. It's nice and kind of painterly. As long as you get that feel of that movement going across, that's enough for me, for what we're doing here today. I'm not going to sweat that too much. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the ball, and I'm now going to put in what we call reflections and highlights. And I'll come back and I'll knock that out on her, and then we'll basically be done. So reflections and highlights are, well, reflections are what's happening in the shadows, and the highlights are what happened in the light. And so we always start, the idea is that if this is our shadow, this is going to be our reflection. If that's our shadow, we can go one darker or one lighter. This is our light, one darker or one lighter, and if this is our light, we can just go one darker. We're not going to have anything lighter than this or darker than this. We're going to stay within this scale. And so some things will be left out, and some things will be less impactful or more impactful than they are in the reference material. But again, this is the beginning of learning, and you'll see when I move it over to here, it's still going to do some really nice things. You can see, look at this face. It's looking pretty good at the moment. And I haven't really started, the reflections and highlights make a big difference. But this face is nice and solid using exactly the same technique here. Kind of see it bridging the gap. So from here, this would be a good brush. So in this shadow, I could probably go a little bit darker, just down on this edge. And again, it's not going to do much. It's going to be fairly subtle. But there is a darker value down there. And it helps to describe a little bit more of the atmosphere in the space. Down here, this is darker against that shadow. So the edge isn't so abrupt. Where the edge of the ball hits that shadow is not so abrupt. And again, it's in the painting, it's a little bit It's a little bit darker than what I'm putting in here, but this will do the job. Again, not much, just adds a little bit of atmosphere. Again, it's going to have a lot more impact in here because there's lots that I can do. In the ball, there's not a lot going on. On the other side of this shadow, I can also go one step lighter, and I can put in any reflections of light bouncing off the table, right? So I can get maybe a little bit of extra light in here. And again, it's not much, not a big jump, just a little bit. It's kind of in here like this. And then really kind of soft on the top. And again, like blending the stuff is hard. The board just makes every mark so crisp. So once I've got those in, there's nothing really going on in either of these. I could actually take this shadow. Again, I go one step darker, and I can get this edge. And it helps to fold the front of the table, right? It goes from being kind of two shades side by side, and it kind of bends that corner, right? And so just that little bit of extra dark right at the edge. Doesn't have to be much. Again, most of these things, most of the beauty, the elegance in a painting happens in subtle ways, right? And so here I just kind of fade. I want sharp edge at the top, kind of just pull it down and grade the bottom edge. But that helps to fold and create a frontal plane and a receding plane. And I would say that's basically it for the shadows. There's nothing else. There's really nothing to be done in here. I mean, if I want, I could say that, well, the shadow is much darker back in here where it's closer to the ball, and I could open this up a little bit like that. That's going to give a little bit more, again, a little bit more atmosphere. Just a little bit. And again, just fan brush to get some of the brush strokes out. It just does a little bit, adds a little bit. It's bare. I'm sure you guys could barely see it if you can see it at all. But that little bit of value shift allows it to feel like you can feel there's some density to the air. And then from there, I would move to the lights. So on the tabletop, that's my light. I don't really see anything darker that I would put in, but I could go one step lighter. I could go one step lighter just at the edge of the table, in the same way that I put that darker edge in. I can make this edge a little bit lighter as well, which helps to reinforce the fact that there's a flat plane on top, and that it bends forward, and you've got a frontal plane and then the top plane. And so, again, I would make the edge sharp against this, and then soften the top of it and make it a gradient. Let it fade into the rest of the tabletop, like that. All right, and that gives me a really crisp edge on the front of the table. It really bends it. And then in here, because this is our light, we can only go darker, and there's really nothing darker to put in, so we would leave it alone. You know, we would, if we had a lighter shade, we'd get a highlight in here. But it's already solid. And that's basically it. I mean, if I want to finesse a little bit, there's one other mark I can put down. I could basically dissolve the back edge of this shadow, just soften it a little bit, and it'll make it feel further away than the shadow on the front edge, which helps to give an impression of depth. Right? It doesn't have to be very soft, just softer than the one up front. And that's it. And so that's basically done. I'm now going to move that over. I'm going to apply the same things to the portrait.
It is 10:01.
Okay, yeah, we're good. We're good. May, you got 30 minutes. We're going to drag you over here, okay? Okay, so I'm going to start in the hair. And I'm just going to go, in the hair. This is my shadow. I can go one darker and one lighter. So I'm going to start with the darker shade, and I'm going to just drop in a few things that are noticeably darker. And it's going to give me a little bit more variation inside of the hair. And again, I don't want to go crazy. I just want to describe that there's a difference in some of these places, right? And so not too heavy-handed. Again, I'm not going to get into any refined marks. These are just really kind of choppy marks that I'm putting down. Again, trying to make sense of what's going on in her hair. I'm not trying to paint hair. All I'm doing is these big overarching shapes that are darker than the average of what's here. Nothing more. And again, this can be built up in subsequent layers and subsequent passes even while it's wet. You can continue to build this up. I'm not looking to make a finished painting here. I'm just looking to demonstrate how the technique that we use for the ball effectively builds out a portrait in the same way without any differences. I mean, I'm basically just dropping in reflections here, or darker values within the shadows, but we categorize them as anything that goes into the shadows, a darker or lighter value at the end, basically is defined as reflections.
Kevin, would you mind scooting the painting over to the left a little bit? Right there, thanks.
Good. I've got that. Now I'm just going to drop in some darker shades in the ear. Again, very basic stuff. Like I'm not getting in and doing details. These are crude marks. They're not meant to be anything more. Right? I didn't do any more on the sphere, so I don't want to put anything in here. I don't want to do anything here that I didn't do on the sphere. Again, there's a lot more going on here because there's a lot more going on here. The ball doesn't have a lot to address. There's just more shapes in here because of the subject. Okay. Jawline. And again, this is going to have to be graded on the top. Right, all of these marks go down and put them down sharp, but eventually at least one of the edges has to be turned into a gradient. And I'll get around to that once I've got these values in place. So, we're down to a smaller brush. Try to stay away from too much refinement. Try to keep it really simple. You know, all these subtle shifts make a big difference. Again, having to get down to smaller and smaller brushes as I go here. You gotta be kidding me. I know they could hear that, right?
Yep.
You guys hear the weightlifter upstairs? It's one of those nights. So I'm gonna handle the eyes while I'm here, right? Because if I were using this shadow, this would be the shade I'd be adjusting with. So I'm gonna just basically take care of all of these shadows as I go. So here I'm just gonna open up this value just a little bit, make it a little bit less dark. Just gonna pull that. I put the nostril in, but I'm just gonna pull it out. Just let it blend in here. And again, you think like the nostril matters, but the truth is in the structure of the head, it really doesn't. It doesn't make that much of a difference. It doesn't make or break the face. Just gonna go around and knock some of these edges down. But all I'm doing is blending them into the surrounding area. And you can see, like, I mean, as I'm doing this, the face is becoming more and more three-dimensional. And again, each of these things that I've done kind of gone in their own space, right? I filled the shadows, filled the lights, made the gradients, right? Each one of these things compartmentalized, they're not a lot of work. But when you start stacking one thing on top of another, one skill, one application on top of the next, they add up, start to be quite impactful. And again, all I'm doing is picking and choosing places where it seems like there's a darker shade and just dropping it in. Not a lot of calculation here. Science.
It is 10:15.
Okay. Yeah, we're good. All right, so I've got all these shades down. I'm just going to soften my edges. You know, just as a thought, whether this is done in grayscale or in color, it's the same thing. Really doesn't make any difference. You mix your colors beforehand. You make sure they're the right colors, the right values, and it does exactly the same thing. But again, remember, like, these values, they were random. They didn't have anything to do with the photograph. So if you had mixed colors and did the same thing, as long as the colors look like flesh tones, you'd have something that looks like skin here. Soften that a little bit. So I've got my darker shades, and I can go one step lighter in these areas too if I see anything that I think should be lighter. So I'm just going to look around. There's this little edge right in here under the mouth. I'll put that in. A little bit of lighting here. Side of the nose. A little bit right there. In here, I have a little mark right there. A little bit up in there. And again, these just little subtle shifts. A little bit of extra light in here. Again, one of the nice things about this is that it's organized. I know exactly what shade goes where because I don't have to think about it. The palette tells me if I'm working in that shadow, I can only use these two shades. If I'm working in this light, I can only use these two shades. There are no there are limited choices, and so it simplifies everything. It just makes everything easy to make sense of. Again, I can pull out this just a little bit. Same up in here, just a little bit. And again, I'm not worried about being overly precise right now. I'm just trying to get a general feel of what's going on in here. So I've got my shadows. Let's see if anything in the hair, maybe a little bit back in here. A little bit of something going on back in here, maybe another light back here. So that's good. I'm now going to move over to my lights, right? So this is my light. I'm allowed to go only one step darker because there's nothing lighter, right? There's nothing lighter. I can go one step darker. But there's definitely stuff in here that I can use this for, right? So here. Knock my edges down as I go. Actually, I'm going to go to a smaller brush. A lot of these marks are going to be smaller. Just kind of neutralize whatever's in the brush. Or just go to a lighter brush. That'd be better. Again, I'm just going to work my way over here. It's good. Here, this is all good. But this definitely dark around here. This outer edge. This comes down. And there's quite a bit of darker value in here, which describes the cheek. The highlight up in there, just dissolve the edge, create a gradient. Again, just adding that subtle value shift. Here, there's some stuff going on. Definitely darker value there. And again, I'm not refining anything, just making marks. And I'm only working in the light, not working in the shadows at this point. It's just lights. The eye is not quite so white. Same on this side. There's a highlight up at the top, but the white of the eye is relatively dark. This highlight's like, I don't want this to be so bright. I'm just going to knock it down with this shade. And just soften that edge. Soften the edge in here as well. Same over here. Right. And again, just kind of soften the edge just a little bit. I think, for the most part, it's probably a good place to stop. All right, I'm going to put in a background real quick. And again, like at this point, there's other stuff that I could do. I could refine it a little bit more just by like breaking from the rules now and putting a few extra marks. And like, see this mark in here. It's really kind of important to the mouth. And so, like, this comes down and out. And there's this mark out here. It's kind of like that. It's kind of in there like that. Right, and so again, I can go in, once I get to this point, I can go in and I can start making decisions for myself based on what I think is necessary now to make the painting successful, right? But it's basically been carried all the way to here just with this technique, just with the exact same thing that I did to create this ball. I'm just going to grab a big brush. I'm going to drop a background in. And so the background on this is light. It kind of falls between these two shades. I think I'm going to go with this shade, and I'm just going to fill the background. What's the time?
It's 10:25.
5 minutes, May. And again, there's room for lots of refinement here. This is a wonderful example of how something very simple can give you a solid base. Again, like refining it from here is easy because all the structure's in place. The structure's the hard part. Once you've got the structure, the details just fall into place. The structure tells you what to do with them, where they go, what value they should be. I would know immediately if I put something down on this and it was the wrong value, it would kind of scream, "What are you doing? You know, I don't belong here."
Evan, will you be cutting this out and framing it after, or is this just a practice?
This,
Yep.
we're going to give it away.
So you won't be cutting
We're
it
going to
down?
send it out just the way
Yeah.
it is.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's going to go out exactly as it is. I'm not cutting it down. You get it. You can cut it down when you get it, whoever that is. if you want to get rid of the sphere. And again, I want to remind, anybody who's watching that, like what you're seeing here, like this technique that I just used, in Evolve, that's the second painting you do. I'm using the same painting technique that we use for the second painting in the program, and yet look at what it's been able to produce. That's how it should be.
Yeah, and on that note, if you want a process for making paintings and learning the fundamentals of painting and getting these kinds of skills that are like a foundation, bringing you all the way to photorealism and just being able to break down what you see, understand it, and recreate it, then you can check out the Evolve program. This is what we do all the time, and it's a lot of fun. So we've got links in the description of this live stream if anyone wants to check that out. More than welcome to.
Okay. We're good. Oh, it's funny. I never know how this stuff's gonna play out. It's actually a pretty fun day. Do we have any questions? Just kind of fiddle around and soften a few edges while I'm answering. Go ahead.
This question is from an Evolve student in Block 4.
Yes.
Mr. Murphy, could you do a video on how to resolve problems? What do you do when your paint dries and it is the wrong color, when a line is off, stuff that you encounter?
So one of the problems with that is that I don't encounter those things, right? It's been a long time. My process is down to a science. I don't stumble around. And when we first started the program, we were doing charcoal pencils, black and white charcoal pencils. And students were submitting homework and they were having a problem. And it took me weeks of playing around with the materials to figure out how they were getting the problem, how they were producing the problem. It was just one problem. And figuring out what they were doing wrong was really hard. Because for me, I pick the materials up and I use them, I know what to do. Very hard. It's always easy if you have something very specific. Our homework instructors have the answers. If you have something that's, that they can't resolve, they'll bump you up to Piper, and if Piper doesn't have the answer, she'll send you to me. But that's basically the chain. Somebody will have the answer for you, but the question has to be a very specific one. If you have something, I'd be happy to answer. If you can pose a specific issue you're running into.
Yeah, and just to remind our students who are watching, you have the instructors that you can go to get really specific answers, and even have one-on-one meetings where you can have a whole conversation back and forth, asking all of your specific questions and getting those very specific answers. So definitely take advantage of that.
Oh, that reminds me, I wanted to put in, forgot about this. So in the eyes, I'm gonna put in some of the reflective quality, not the highlights, but the eyes themselves have quite a bit of light in them. Right now, she looks like a great white shark. Her eyes are just black. Probably gonna up this value just a little bit more for effect. Break the rules a little bit. Go too far. The light in the eyes to be seen. Okay, any other questions? Oh, that's good. Okay, May, you want to come by? Why don't you grab a chair? I think we have a chair right there. I just come right up over here.
And May, just remember to speak loud because Kevin's mic is attached to his collar.
Yeah, you'll be talking to my mic. Where's your mic? My mic's right here. Anyway, everybody, this is May. May is my apprentice here at the school. She's been studying with me for about 6 years, about 6 years in total. But she got serious about 2 years ago. She came to me to see about how she would build a career. And so I took her on as an apprentice, which I haven't done in a very long time. And she's been working quite a bit the last 2 years. But she's going to be jumping in for the summer. She'll be working on a figure painting. How big is it, about?
Maybe a little under like 2 by 3.
Okay, so
Like
somewhere in the range of about 2 foot by 3 foot. And she's going to be doing that painting from first marks all the way up to final painting, just like I've been doing. And so you'll have the benefit of a couple of things. One is, even though she's using the same technique, she's changed it around to fit her needs and work with her strengths and around her weaknesses. We all do that. But also, like I was saying earlier, like I'm so far removed from some of these things, like even trying to replicate a mistake that somebody's made can be very difficult for me. May's only been at this a couple of years, and so she's much closer to where you are as a student than where I am as an instructor. Even though she could easily teach this stuff, her understanding is still grounded in the struggles that you guys face every single day. She's not that far removed from making those same mistakes herself. And that turns her into an incredible resource for you when she's painting, for you to be able to ask questions. She's not going to be able to answer Evolve-specific questions because she doesn't do Evolve. The program here at the school and the program in Evolve, though they're very similar, there are differences, and her training has taken her well beyond anything that we do in Evolve, just as she's been studying the last year or so. So anyway, anything you would like to say? And feel free to drop a couple of questions. She'd be happy to answer them right now.
Yeah, everyone is saying hi. Hi, May.
Hi, everyone. I mean, you kind of covered it. I want to make a point that I am, just like everyone else, I'm not talented in any way. The painting that I was like in the middle of doing before I went to Kevin and I was like, help, I want to be good at this, but I'm not able to, and I don't know why, and I really want to be able to. It's atrocious, and Kevin likes showing it to people as like making a point of like the power of the program to like turn like anyone around as long as they're committed and to the curriculum and also like to optimizing their performance.
So what we're going to do is we're going to post that image. Okay. Daniel's going to have it, and he's going to show it to you on the first day, on Sunday when she starts painting, so that you see where she was just 2 years ago. Well, the thing is, I think it's very important. It's a reason that I keep my portfolio from when I was 18, 19 years old. I keep it here in the school so that the students, when they think that they just lack talent, I can show them that they're a lot better than I was at their age. And being able to see what May is doing now and where she was just 2 years ago should excite everybody. No matter where you are in the program, or how much you might be struggling, it should excite you about the potential. And you'll be in good hands for the summer. She's going to show you my bastardized version of my technique.
Whoa, I don't like that connotation.
But you're going to get to see my technique. Like we were saying, today I was blending, I was doing my gradients differently, not using the blade edge of the brush. You're going to see the same techniques, but handled by her in her way. Right, so she's to the point where a lot of the rules about how we're supposed to do things, they don't apply anymore. Right, she's gotten to the point where she can now bend and break the rules because she knows them, and so you're going to get to see her doing that. When I'm painting, I try not to do that. I try to show it to you the way that we teach it in Evolve, but you're going to get to see her kind of riff on this stuff, which should be a lot of fun. There's a lot of fun some of the things she does, like specifically that she enjoys doing, you're going to be painting wings in this, right? So she does beautiful wings. The feathers are incredible. And just her application is beautiful. Her color mixing is incredible. And so you're going to get a chance to see that. And like I said, it's going to be a real treat for you for what will be sometime between 8 to 10 weeks through the summer while I take care of my summer programs. And then I'll be back on the other side. So, but you will get a chance to see some of her work before she starts or while she's working on Sunday. Do we have any questions for me?
Well, just to say, May, don't worry, we'll also be showing all your amazing pieces of art as well, not just the one that got you started. So.
It would be funny if you only posted the one that got me started, just left it hanging for like a week. And
Oh no.
like, who is she?
Yeah. Why are we listening to her? Here's a question. Hi, May. How did you manage your time between your art education and high school?
I started the apprenticeship. Well, like before the apprenticeship, I was just basically doing like weekly classes that would come in on Sundays. There were classes like all days on Sundays here at the Art Academy from like 10 to like 6:30, and so I would come in for like as long as I could like during that like entire like 8.5 hour window. So I'd only come in like once a week pretty much because I was booked with like extracurriculars in school and stuff. But once I got more serious with the apprenticeship, that was like the beginning of 2020. So that was like 3 months before like quarantine and everything, right? So I got like one painting done over the course of like those Sundays in the first 3 months, and then like after like lockdown, I had like a lot of free time at home, and so I was basically painting at home like kind of like whenever I could in between, school still happening and stuff. So I was kind of stuck at home and just working on kind of like evolved images, like not my own stuff because we couldn't get in to do like photo shoots or anything for a few months up until like the summer, I think until June, and then I think the school was kind of opened back up again. I don't know, I forget to what extent.
But even now, like with college, like you manage, she's in her first, she
about
just
high
finished her
school.
first year of college, right? But she just finished her first year of college, and she was able to manage, full-time college, plus a job that she works, plus getting in and getting her paintings done, right?
So I guess college is like more, I guess, impressive or intense maybe than high school. So I go to Rutgers, which is about 20 minutes away from the school, like by car. And so I was lucky enough to get like a parking permit because there's a really high in demand there. And so I would just come in. The way I organized my schedule too was kind of with the intent of having like large like blocks of time in between classes, or just like front loading my classes at the beginning of the day so that I could just have like entire afternoon or evening to like come in if I wanted to. And so I was very like particular about like what classes and courses I took and like how they're arranged to like allow for that kind of schedule. And then I would just come in whenever I could, and I would come in all day on Sundays as well. So.
But she's committed, right? If you want to get something done, you commit the time, and I think she sleeps 3 hours a night. So, but yeah, you commit the time. That's the bottom line. For everything that she's got going on, she shows up and she paints. Constantly doing photo shoots, and she's constantly moving through paintings. She's got 2 going right now. She just finished a portrait and an illustration, just one thing after another, right? And she's got plans for 6 paintings during the summer. So it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work, but this is career path. So, any other questions?
That's it.
No? Okay. Want to call it a night? We can finish before 11.
Yep.
Pretty cool. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate you spending the spring with me. I will see you back in the fall. And like I said, for the next 10 weeks, enjoy May. She's going to be great. You're going to get to see a really nice painting being made. And I look forward to having you back in a couple of months. Well, back for me.
Awesome.
Have a great